section, I welcome all of you to the first in a series of lectures on book publishing. I first want to thank very much Grace Reed and David Ladd for making this possible, and particularly for Bill Lofquist and Mark Carroll, who are our first two speakers. They put a lot of work into helping Steve and I plan the course and decide what the lectures should be and who the speakers should be. And finally, Steve Rosenblatt is really the person that did all the work. He made all the calls and really designed the whole program, and I think you'll all enjoy it very much. I think it'll be very informative, and I'd like Steve to take over now and introduce our first speaker.
Okay. Before introducing our speaker, I also would like to express my personal appreciation for all of those who contributed generously of their time and their talents in making this course possible. David Ladd and Grace Reed for their support, including financial assistance, to our chief, Bob Davis, and Jane Collins and Lila Mulgaoker, and Kevin Miracle, our attorney advisor, for their encouragement and support. I also wish to give special thanks to Lily Pulaski of our section. Lily has a background in public relations and assisted me in obtaining speakers and advised me on the details that make a program successful. Joel Ross and Bill Jabram of the Information and Publications section, who despite the heavy workload were most willing to videotape this session. And to Betty Burke, the Registrar's Office, who assisted in scheduling the speakers. I also I wish to especially acknowledge the assistance of Bill and of Mark Carroll. Mark will speak at the next session, and they were with us from the very beginning. They were particularly helpful in examining our needs and in designing this program. William Lofquist graduated from New York University Graduate School of Business Administration with an MBA in marketing. He has been an industry specialist for the U.S. government for over 16 years and is currently employed by the Bureau of Industrial Economics at the Department of Commerce. Previously, he was an industry economist for the U.S. Postal Rate Commission. And before joining the federal government, he held industrial and consumer research positions with advertising agencies in New York. He is the author of numerous articles appearing in U.S. business magazines and has contributed to the Bowker Annual and to the Encyclopedia of Library and Information Science. He has acted as a consultant to foundations and nonprofit organizations, and in fact, when the Copyright Office did their study on the manufacturing requirements, Bill was called in to give information on the publishing industry. His international activities with the Department of Commerce include U.S. export promotion missions in Kenya, Liberia, and Japan. Bill finally is Secretary of the Washington Publishers Association and is active with other professional organizations. Today's lecture will be the overview, and I'm pleased to introduce.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, Jane, for inviting me here. Delighted to be with this group today in the first annual David Ladd World Series of Book Publishing. I understand that there'll be a Super World Series tonight if the Hurricanes stay away from St. Louis. We're not going to have that problem today. I've never seen a more organized group than this one with videotape cameras and a full entourage. This is just amazing. Book publishing has often been cited as a gentleman's profession. Strange, because most of the people employed in it are women. And in fact, some people don't feel that book publishing is a gentleman's profession at all. Preparation for this series, I read through Publishers Weekly. This is the weekly magazine put out by the Bowker Company in New York City, devoted to different things going on in the book publishing business. The date of this issue is October 15, 1982, And there's a note in here from a Mr. Leo Cooper, a publisher in the British Islands. He says, one's heart begins to sink at the prospect of meeting all those bizarre American publishers. With one or two notable exceptions, I am convinced that most Americans are now raving mad. To do business with them these days is almost impossible. They never reply to letters and are in the main dishonest and incompetent, and their book production is a disgrace. I know of one major firm which, as a matter of principle, pays British publishers last, if at all, on the basis of the fact that we're powerless to do anything about it. British powerless? Please, please. The British started book publishing in the United States years back when we were their colony. And I'd like, if I could, to move ahead from Mr. Cooper, move backwards, rather, from Mr. Cooper, take a look at some of the histories of book publishing in the United States. The first book that the colony produced took place in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1640. It was done on the press of a printer-publisher of the time called Stephen Day, and it was a religious work titled The Bay Psalm Book. For many years since publication of the Bay Psalm Book, the United States was a nation of reprinters. We didn't have many authors, we didn't have many presses, and very few publishers. What we did have was a lot of books from the United Kingdom that traveled to the United States and were reprinted here. We became basically a group of reprinters rather than a group of publishers. As late as 1820, over 70% of the books available in the United States were of British origin. By 1850, however, our own publishing activities had reached the stage where the figures were reversed. By the 1850, 70% of the books sold in the U.S. were original works by American authors, and only 30% were done by the U.K. The development of book publishing in the U.S. really had its greatest impetus in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Many of the large publishing houses that we recognize today began during this time. Harper & Row, Random House, Doubleday in New York City, Houghton Mifflin, Little Brown in Boston, Lippincott in Philadelphia, and Rand McNally in Chicago were just some of the firms that developed during this period. Many of these firms developed initially as either typesetting plants or as printing plants, and gradually evolved as pure publishing organizations. As the 20th century moved along, most publishers felt that their main interest was in the publication of books, not their production, not the printing and setting of type, so they divested themselves of their production operations. Some publishers, however, still maintain their own printing plants. If you're a subscriber or member of the Literary Guild, owned by the Doubleday Company, the books that you buy are done on the printing presses owned by the Doubleday plants, either in Garden City or in Virginia. And some of the publishers also have their own bookstores. Doubleday continues to sort of eke along its existence with some bookstores located in the U.S., and Macmillan, which owned Brentano's for many years, divested itself of Brentano's only recently. It was in the 1920s that the developments in, some initial developments in book publishing that we know today first started. For example, book clubs were invented by a fellow living in Greenwich Village, as it were, in about 1925. The Book of the Month Club was started then, and it was and still is the largest club of its type. Most of the facilities of the Book of the Month Club have moved out of the village and over into central Pennsylvania, but Book of the Month Club still is alive and very, very well. In addition, the 1920s also saw the development of some very strong-minded publishers. Alfred Knopf, Bennett Cerf, and several others began to develop a very strong and dominating, if you will, spirit within the U.S. book publishing industry, and many of them had brilliant ideas. Cerf, for example, when he was president of Random House, started what we know now as the Modern Library. I'm not sure if you remember the Modern Library. Basically, these are hardcover books, and they are reprints of famous works of literature. They generally sold for $1 a piece. They are printed on quality paper, and a real bargain, and advanced the cause of literature in the United States significantly. Finally, in the late 1930s, a second development took place known as the paperback book. The paperback book, the mass market paperback book, was developed by the firm of Simon & Schuster, and they called their book operation pocketbooks. It was developed in 1938, 1939, and was launched very firmly with the onset of World War II. Paperback books, because of their cheap price, 25 cents a copy, and cheap method of production on inexpensive paper, became extremely popular during the war with the U.S. military, and then after the war, they surged into many different outlets that were not book outlets at that time. Variety stores, drug stores, and a new development, if you will, called supermarkets. Let's, if I could, I know this is sounding like a Saturday Night Live, one of those films where the history of the world is presented in 30 seconds, but if we could, I'd like to move on to publishing in the Great Society. Let's pretend that during the Eisenhower years there were no books. Of course, it's a lie, there were, but we'd like to talk about and look at publishing in the Great Society. Book publishing received a massive boost in the 1960s as a result of federal aid to education and libraries. Publishers were almost overwhelmed at the demand for books and at the surge money coming from the federal government could do. Publisher sales doubled. The number of publishing houses starting up almost tripled. Outpouring of funds for instructional materials was indeed matched for demand for all books. Special interest books, environmental books, books on or by minority members, self-development, self-expression books, all came with a flourish during these what are now called golden years of U.S. publishing. At the current time, here in '82, there are a lot of developments sort of taking place that I wanted to mention to you before we get into some specifics of book publishing. First development is, as you've probably noticed, the growth in trade paperback books. If you go to a bookstore, you'll probably notice that trade paperback books are probably more commonplace than hardcover books and even mass market paperback. Mass market paperback books are books that now sell for, say, $3 or less, or in the case of Shogun, $4 or $5 for the monstrously thick volumes. But trade paperbacks are books that have the quality of the paper of hardcover, and yet they're not as expensive as hardcover. They could range anywhere from $5 up to $15 and are extremely popular. They tend to offer the price and the flexibility of mass market paperbacks, but with a quality of hardcover. For many book purchasers, they are actually preferred to hardcover books, even when the price of the trade paperback is almost the same as the price of the hardcover work. A second, if you will, activity taking place in the industry is the growth of chain bookstores. As I'm going to hope to bring out later in this talk this morning, the growth of chain bookstores has its, if you will, good and controversial points. Two large chains, the B. Dalton chain and the Walden Books chain, now have about 1,500 stores in total and have certainly aided U.S. demand for books. The high price of books, however, particularly the hardcover books, has brought about discounting in the U.S. bookstore business, something that has never taken place before. Here in Washington, we're very sensitive to discounting because of the growth of Crown Books, owned by the people who run the Dart drug chain. In New York City, Crown Books has an equivalent organization called Barnes & Noble, which is very active there, and also in Boston. Crown Books, as you may know, has expanded way beyond Washington. They have stores in L.A., Chicago, San Diego. Heaven knows where they're going to go next, but they certainly are an organization on the move. A third activity taking place in book publishing is the fact that publishers are issuing more and more titles every year. Annual book title output is around 48,000 in 1981. And based on this trend, 82 title output will probably be 50,000 titles. This number of titles, of course, doesn't include works published by the federal or other governments, nor does it include some of the non-commercial works that don't get listed in the official title counts. Even though the number of titles seems to be going up, the actual number of books printed for every title is going down. Some people say this is the result of the hard-charging Harvard MBAs who have marched into the publishing houses after the houses have been bought out by the conglomerates. The reasons are that it has been current practice in the past for a publisher to try and keep his books in print. The idea was, you print 10,000, you sell 5,000 in the first year, and the remaining 5,000 you store in your warehouse. And you keep them in the warehouse for as long as it takes to dispose of the books, or when you feel there's no market left. That has changed. The Harvard MBAs, if you will, whoever they are, have decided that we've got to get these books out of the warehouse. It's just too expensive to keep them there. Publishers must resign themselves to allowing their books to go out of print fast. 2 years, 3 years at the most. And it's a development that for, say, book lovers find appalling, but financiers find delightful. It's just a case of simple economics overwhelming the industry and cutting into the length of time that books are put on a backlist. Backlist would be books that are not sold immediately but held in warehouse for sale later. Another development, if you will, in the book industry is, I think you're also aware of the large growth of paperback book companies. As you know, the mass market paperback book companies generally exist on the children, if you will, of the hardbound publishers. The book comes out first in hardcover, it is reviewed, receives a good review, people buy the book, read it, and after 6 months or a year, you see that book issued in a paperback format. Two things have happened with regarding paperback houses. One, it's very expensive to buy that popular author, his works, from the hardcover house. Frequently, the author wants so much money up front in the millions of dollars that the paperback house can never recoup that millions of dollars in the sale of the book. Number two, in order to have a nice big sale of paperback books, you've got to produce literally millions of them. You've got to have facings in every bookstore. It's got to jump out at you at the airport. It's even got to sing to you, if you will, in the supermarket. To do that costs a lot of money. Production costs are getting higher and higher, and so paperback firms are faced with these two problems. One, it costs a lot to buy the author. Second, tremendous amount of money to print a lot of books, most of which are going to get returned. It's like magazines. If you go to a newsstand and you see stacks and stacks of magazines, you got to figure half of those are going to wind up in the junk pile, scrapped. Same thing with paperback books. The way it works is those that are not sold are returned to the publisher. The publisher doesn't want them. What he wants is the cover. So you, the bookstore, rip off the cover of the paperback book, stick it together with all the other covers, and return it to the publisher and get full credit for that book. What happens to the torn-up paperback book? It is scrapped, shredded, and becomes new paper for new paperback books. Sort of a never-ending cycle. In order to avoid some of the costs, the high costs of paperback book publishing, there are a lot of paperback book firms that are doing original publishing. Why don't you go out and instead of buying the author's rights from the hardcover house, just publish him as is? If you've been following the Washington Post this week, you will see that the memoirs of ex-President Jimmy Carter are being serialized in the Post. And the company that's doing the serialization is the owner of the rights to that, and that's Bantam. Bantam is the largest U.S. paperback book house. It is they who have the rights to Mr. Carter, not Random House, not Harper & Row, not Houghton Mifflin, but a paperback house. In other words, paperback house, Bantam, is doing the original publishing here. They are no longer a complete reprinter. In this way, Bantam and other paperback houses hope to get around some of the hard economics of paperback publishing. Finally, one last point as to current developments in publishing is that publishers are very nervous about U.S. readers running out of leisure time. No one buys newspapers anymore, at least not afternoon newspapers. And publishers are fearful that interactive cable television and personal computer use may cut into the reader's value of time. This is somewhat of a conjectural area, and not much research has been done. But publishers are very nervous that what seems to have happened in newspaper readership, that is a plateauing of circulation, plateauing or even a decline in some areas of newspaper readership, may eventually slough over into book publishing. People only have so much time with all the electronic doodads now available to us, whether it's Super TV, cable TV, interactive TV, business usage TV, or the personal computer. Where will the time be found to go through bookstores browsing for books? Publishers are nervous. Well, let's leave their nervousness behind us, and let's leave, if we will, some of those developments in book publishing. And I'd like to talk to you now, if I could, about the second section of the outline I prepared, and this is the structure of U.S. book publishing. Book publishing industry has between 10 and 15,000 publishing companies. However, only about 2,000 of these companies have, say, 5 or more employees and a title output of 3 books or 5 books a year. That means that there's a vast amount of garage publishing or second-story bedroom publishing out there, frequently done by authors who can't find their books published by anyone else, so they start it themselves. Or it's printers who decide that the printing business is slow, the publishing business seems to be faster, get a few books. That's why there's a large number of publishers, but not very many significant ones, great ones, large ones. In fact, there are about only 30 book publishing companies in the United States with 500 or more establishments. They're huge, but not that overwhelming compared to other industries. Geographically, as you may sense, the industry is concentrated in New York City. Some people say the east side of Manhattan. Firms in New York account for about 40 to 50% of the industry's total sales, which, incidentally, in 1982 come to about $7.7 billion estimated. That's a lot of money. Growth rate for the industry has been about 10 to 12% a year, with about 2/3 of that inflation and about 1/3 or less real growth, if you will, actual books sold. Publishing industry employs about 65,000 persons. It's a big industry. As I mentioned earlier, female employment represents the largest part of the total, about 60%. There are very few labor unions in the publishing industry. There have been some signs recently in New York at different houses of some labor unions trying to organize the editorial employees, but by and large they have not been that successful. I'm not sure. Steve, was the group given an outline of this view of book publishing? What I'd like to do is to follow the outline as much as we could, and at the same time invite you at any point, if you have questions, please speak up now or at any time. If I know the answer, of course I'll respond, and if I don't know the answer, I'll either lie or ignore the question. As long as we have this agreement, I think it should work out fine. Since I'm assured that you do have this outline, I'd like, if I could, to go down some of the major markets for U.S. books in the United States. Keeping in mind we've got about 2,000 firms, 65,000 employees, and a total market of over $7 billion. The largest market for U.S. books is the classroom. Textbook sales in the United States are about $2 billion a year. These go to elementary schools, high schools, colleges, and there are a lot of them. There are about 75,000 elementary schools, about 27,000 high schools, and about 3,000 colleges. In all, you're reaching, through those classrooms, over 25% of the reading population in the U.S. 55 million students, each student constantly besieged with new textbooks. Some of the leading textbook publishers are Scott Forsman and Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. The textbook market is the largest, and books produced by different publishing companies are not books that would normally come in by unknown authors. In fact, publishing companies who specialize in textbook publishing either go out and pick instructors to write books. It takes a long period of time, sometimes 5 years, 7 years, before a consortium, if you will, of different authors is able to agree on what the format for a textbook series should be. Millions and millions of dollars are invested in these series. If you sell one series of textbooks, for example, to the state of Texas, then a publisher is not set for life, but he's certainly set for the next 5 years. There are states within continental U.S. that require what they call mandatory deposits of textbooks. That is, you, the publisher, if you're selected, not to pick on Texas, but why not? If you're selected by the state of Texas for your math series in the grades 1 through 8, then you must have all of your books placed in the Texas depository warehouses by the start of the school year. And if you miss that date, you will be in very serious trouble the next time a state adoption comes up. Don't get me wrong, any state with these mandatory selection processes doesn't select just one series of math books, say for grades 1 through 8. They select perhaps 3. But what it is a hunting license. If you're a publisher of math textbooks for the elementary schools, you want to make sure that you're accepted by the state of Texas. We're talking about a lot of kids, a lot of dollars. Once you get accepted, then you go around to each school district trying to sell your series to that Board of Education. But you've got to get approval by the state first, and it's a real dogfight to do it. Texas and about 13 other states have mandatory deposits. You must get approval by the state before you can sell the books within the states. Other states, it's handled on mostly a county by county or town by town basis for textbooks. Second category of book publishing is the technical, scientific, and professional books. The market for this is about $1.2 billion. Again, a very sizable and profitable area of book publishing. Sales of these books are to colleges, to libraries, and there's about 32,000 libraries in the United States, to other institutions and individuals. The kind of books we're talking about are business books, medical books, law books, books on health, nursing, scientific books, chemistry, biology, any of the sciences, books that are not a textbook but are closely associated with the classroom and with the profession, key ingredient. The largest publishers of these type of books are McGraw-Hill and John Wiley & Son. A third category of book publishing is religious books. This is not as large as the other categories. It's about $400 million. And religious books tend to be done on a, if you will, a religious sect-by-sect basis. Religious books include Bibles, which are done by many firms, including Cambridge University Press, Oxford, Thomas Nelson, National Publishers, Philadelphia. Or they can be on different religious subjects. The Seabury Press, for example, in New York, represents mostly the Episcopalian community. The Zondervan Press, publishing company in Michigan, I believe is either Presbyterian or Methodist. Every sect has its different publishers that focus on religious books to that particular area. The next category of publishing is called the general trade books. General trade books are, for many of us, say, the most exciting part of publishing. They involve adult trade books, which are not, don't be deceived by the name adult trade. It doesn't mean pornographic or racy books. What it means is books that are purchased by people through bookstores or through libraries. And they use the word adult to distinguish it from juvenile. There is a category of book publishing called juvenile books. Again, sales are mostly to libraries, some sales through bookstores, and these two categories represent a large part of U.S. publishing and perhaps the most exciting part. Adult trade books have sales of about $1.2 billion a year, and juvenile books sales of about $250 million. Juvenile books, the feeling was that if you bought it in a bookstore, the person who bought it was your aunt or your grandmother, and she was determined not to pay more than $5 if it was in hardcover. You can't do that anymore. They cost too much. So the juvenile book publishers very smartly put their books into a trade paperback format, a paperback book that is certainly far above the quality of mass market paperback, but almost as good quality as a hardcover, and selling it for the grandmother's $5. Some famous juvenile book publishing companies are Viking in New York, and also the firm of Grosset and Dunlop. Adult trade book publishers, oh, the list is as long as one's arm. They could start with Scribner's in New York, Random House, Harper & Row, Doubleday, Macmillan, hundreds of firms with thousands of titles issued each year. Another category of general trade books is book clubs. Book clubs are sold almost exclusively through mail order, and it also is a big business, about $600 million. The two leading book clubs are Book of the Month Club, as we already learned, which is owned by Time Life. The second largest club is the Literary Guild, owned by the Doubleday publishing firm. Those books sold through those two clubs are basically for the general population, but there are, as you can imagine, a wide variety of specialized book clubs. There's the Seafarers Book Club, the Fortune Book Club, the Playboy Book Club, and heaven knows what else in terms of book clubs. The largest book club organization is probably Prentice Hall up in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, and they focus on book clubs for businessmen and women. The two other categories remain of the general trade books, the mass market paper-bound books and mail-order books. Mass market paper-bound, we've talked a little bit about. As you can imagine, they're found everywhere. You may be surprised that mass market paper-bound sales in bookstores are about as large as mass market paper-bound sales in supermarkets and other outlets. The industry, as I mentioned, has been beset with very high prices in production and high prices of royalty payments. And they've also been hit by a new interloper called Harlequin Books. Harlequin Books is a Canadian publisher who came from the north and captured the imagination, if you will, of many U.S. readers with their theme-type books, romance-oriented Harlequin books. They found or developed a very strong market for their products. Some Harlequin readers buy a book a week, and Harlequin tries to assist this by publishing a book a week. They are a, if you will, dynamite publishing company from a financial standpoint. Their literary pretensions or literary activities may be less than what others would desire, but you can't fault success in the marketplace, and that's where they have paid off. Finally, our last category of trade books is the mail-order books. The books sold through the mail to individuals and some libraries. Mail-order books are about a market of about $700 million. Mass-market paper-bound books are about $800 million. Mail-order books are done by many companies, but among the most famous are Time Life, Reader's Digest, and Macmillan. We have a unique situation here in Washington. Washington, D.C. is not, say, a publishing community to rival New York City, and yet we have a very, very large publishing firm here called Time Life over in Alexandria. I'm not sure if you are aware how Time Life publishes a series of its books. Let's pretend they want to do a series in the Wild West, and they want to do, say, about 12 volumes. The first thing they do is they do a test market of the U.S. public to see if there's anyone out there who really wants to read about the Wild West. They do extensive marketing, testing, and advertising to see if there is a market for this series. If there is, if their tests develop that there's a market for this, they'll go ahead and get authors and write the books, gather the photographs, do the drawings, and you have yourself a series of 12 volumes in the Wild West. If not, they scrap it. They don't go out and publish the books and then say, gee, I hope someone's going to buy these things. Other publishers do, but not Time Life. They can afford to do this. They're doing it in a series, and they've had a great deal of success. Reader's Digest somewhat the same way with some of their products. Finally, as your outline shows under this structure, there are other different types of publishing firms gathered under different headings. One is university presses. There are in the United States about 100 university presses, and their sales cumulative is about $100 million. The most famous presses are those of the large universities, Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Oxford, Chicago. Sales are mostly to libraries, some to bookstores, and some people regard university press publishing as the last vestige of true publishing. Why? Well, one, they're primarily literary minded, although sometimes they deviate from this literature is the overriding goal theme and verge into other paths. But primarily, their reason for existence is to extend literature in the United States. Secondly, they are more inclined than the commercial publisher to keep their books in print. They'll have large, hopefully, warehousing facilities in order to make sure that their books stay alive in the marketplace for many years. Another category here is reference book publishing. Reference books represent about $200 million in sales each year. They are to libraries, they're sold by direct mail, and they're sold through bookstores. Famous reference book publishers are Dun & Bradstreet, Thomas's Publishing Company, Commerce Clearing House, and of course there are many others. Reference book publishing faces a problem in that many people feel that why should I spend, say, $100 or $200 for a reference book when soon I will be able to get all of that information on an updated basis over my Apple II. This is a very legitimate concern, and reference book publishers have very wisely made their product, that is information, organized in both these formats, book format and by mag tape or computer format. Finally, we are left, if you will, with encyclopedias. Encyclopedias still are an active part of U.S. publishing. Sales are about $200 million, and it's stayed this way for many years. It's not a growth industry. Those who dominate it continue to dominate. World Book, Encyclopedia Britannica, the Grolier Company, which produces Encyclopedia Americana. Part of the problem with encyclopedia publishing is that it's an expensive product. Sales to libraries are steady, but sales by door-to-door to people are subject to the vagaries of the existence of a door-to-door salesperson. There's been a lot of troubles with the Federal Trade Commission with door-to-door sales of encyclopedias, and as a consequence, the industry has probably suffered. Well, that leaves us with our structure of the U.S. publishing industry. I'd like to, if I could, move into step number 3, the actual publishing process. After that, I thought, why don't we take a break, and then after the break, look into publishing issues and publishing associations. The publishing process is listed in order on the outline. And I'd like to, if I could, go through these steps with you now. Everything begins, of course, with the author. But even here, there are variations as to how important is an author. Michael O'Connor, the editor-in-chief of New American Library, a large mass-market paperback publishing firm, once said that the only good author is a dead author. And what Mr. O'Connor was getting at is, if he's dead, we don't have to pay him royalties. And therefore, in his mind, perhaps this was an overriding concern. For most publishers, they prefer to deal with an actual live flesh and blood person. And if they do, the process works something like this. The first actual step in book publishing begins with the manuscript submitted. And submitted to a publishing house, generally not by authors, but rather by literary agents. It hasn't, I don't think, been a recent development, but more and more publishers do not seem to be able to find manuscripts submitted independently, submitted haphazardly, submitted over the transom, that they find acceptable to their house. What they do is they find the scanning process of literary agents to meet their needs far better than any manuscript that happens to walk in the front door. This is not to say that such manuscripts might not eventually be published, but it is to say the chances are extremely, extremely unlikely. Literary agents are generally the key ingredient to getting the manuscript accepted by a publishing house. Now, literary agents are only good for one type of publishing, and that is either juvenile or adult trade publishing. You don't need literary agents to do your mathematics series 1 through 8 for Addison Wesley. What you need there are good professors or instructors who can go to the publishing house and convince them of the worthiness of the series. You need literary agents to get your work of fiction into the house, and you need these agents to get biographies or any other type of individual work into the eyes of the publishers. Publishers claim to read all manuscripts, however. That is, you send a manuscript to a publishing house, in theory, someone there is going to read it. It may be the janitor, but someone is going to read that thing. And they should send you back a note saying, wonderful, but it doesn't meet our needs. In fact, that's the most common thing that happens with manuscripts. Manuscripts that come into publishing houses are probably not even read if they're done in ink or pencil or quill. They've got to be at least typed, and more publishers require that manuscripts come in on a word processing format. This makes the job much easier for the publisher's editors. So if a manuscript is accepted by a house, the first thing that has to be done is to get it processed on a word processor. Once the manuscript's accepted, it goes to an editor. A publishing house has two types of editors. One is called the acquisition editor, and the second is the copy editor. The job of the acquisition editor is to search out good writings, to find good authors, and to bring them into the house and keep them there. The goal in life of the copy editor is, once the manuscript is in the house, to make sure that the manuscript does not violate the English language, that is prepared with the best interests of the author, that everything is grammatically perfect, and that it is readable. Some people feel that editing is the most important part of publishing and the most exciting. Editing tends to be very low pay, but an extremely challenging position. For a woman out of Radcliffe, you have your choice. You can either go to Harper & Row and get a sub-editing job starting at $8,000 a year, or you can go across the street to Chase Manhattan and start at $32,000 a year. Many women prefer to start at $8,000 a year, and that is why book publishing in general is a low-paying industry. Why? It's a very challenging industry. Can you get that same challenge at Chase Manhattan? The answer is yes. Unfortunately, you probably can. But book publishing still has an aura to it that brings in the best in people. After the editing process is done, the book then goes to the design shop, the design part of the publishing house. Here, the manuscript is scanned to determine what kind of typeface will be used in the book. How many pages will it be? What will the book jacket consist of? What kind of design on the book jacket? Is it going to be a trade paper-bound book? Is it going to be a hardcover book? What are the graphics in the book? What different types of artwork, photos, and other things might be needed here? This is all the responsibility of the design personnel, and it's very important. A good, snappy jacket, if you will, can catch people's eyes at the bookstore. Once the design is taken care of, the next step is for the book to physically leave the publishing house and go out and be set in type. Publishers generally do not have their own typesetting facilities. Some do. You will be hearing later from Mr. Bill Begell, president of Hemisphere Press, who does have his own typesetting facilities, but his house is probably unique. Most do not. They have it done by individual type houses outside. After the type is set and the book is proofed on galleys, then the book is ready to go out to the printing company. The printing firm is, again, it's an activity that's contracted out by the publisher. The publisher sends the material to the printing company, and at the same time, he telephones the paper mills and has the paper mill send paper to the printing company. The publisher buys the paper. The reason is, if the printer bought the paper, the printer would charge the publisher an extra 15% for handling the paper, warehousing excess paper, and whatnot. So instead, the publisher saves money by going directly to the mill and buying the paper and having it sent to the printing firm. The printing firm, more and more because of technology, does both the printing and the binding of the book. Back up until about 20 or 30 years ago, the book was printed at one firm and then sent somewhere else for binding. Nowadays, most printing and binding is done by the same firm. The reason is they use web offset presses. It means that the book is printed from a large web roll of paper, passes straight through the press, and at the end of the press, it's folded and cut, sliced into, as you will, into signatures, and it's ready for the binding. It's much easier to have it bound there at that printing establishment than to go to a specialized binder. Finally, you have your printed book. The question is, what happens next? As far as this session today goes, what happens next is, I may be out of videotape. I see nervousness in the back of the room here. Is that the case, sir? If it's not, then let us continue with what does happen next, and that is the books are ready to go out for sale. Let's, if we could, focus on this book that came in, the trade paperback book. Popular book. It's going to go for general sale anywhere in the U.S. The books are sent in many different directions. They're sent from the printing warehouse, printing plant, which usually is in the Midwest, to several places. The publisher usually has 2 or 3 warehouses of its own, geographically dispersed across the country, and a certain number of books will go there. There are wholesalers, 2 or 3 major wholesalers in the United States, and they will receive a certain number of this book. Finally, the major chains, Walden, Crown Books, B. Dalton, they will get a certain number of books sent directly to them by the printing plant, and that is the way the book is initially distributed. Those 3 areas: warehousing by the publisher, sent directly to bookstores if the bookstores are large enough, and also to wholesalers who will in turn send the book along. As I mentioned, there are 2 or 3 major wholesalers, and basically the job of the wholesaler is to service bookstores and libraries. Most libraries, since they're buying books in just 1s and 2s, can't very well go to the publisher and say, send me a book. Some libraries have standing orders with publishers. If you do anything, if you make a book, send it to me. I like you. We'll send you the money later. Good. Publisher loves it. He has a guaranteed sale of a certain number of his books. Very, very few libraries can afford to do that. Only the largest, say, of the college libraries, public libraries. Most of the time, it's in 1s and 2s, and that's the way the bookstore, the book wholesaler makes his money. He has a markup of about 10%. That is, if the book sells for $10, he buys it for about $3, and he sells it to bookstores for, say, $4. In terms of getting your book into bookstores, there are about 20,000 bookstores in the United States. There's been a tremendous surge in bookstores in the last 10 years. It's gone from, say, 10 to 20,000 very, very quickly. Many bookstores are independent. They are stores that are mom-and-pop type stores, and they're not part of a chain or part of a franchise. Basically, the way the stores operate is something like this. The list price of this book, the retail price is $10. They pay $6 for the book to the publisher. Publisher sends them the book, and then they have a 40% area, a 40% markup to give, to pass along to you, the actual buyer of the book, through the bookstore. That is why a #1 bestseller, say, on the New York Times list, you can purchase at Crown for 33% off or 35% off. Think of what that means to Crown. Crown only has a margin of, say, 5% or 7% to work on, whereas a normal bookstore would want to have that whole 40% margin to work on. And the fact that Crown does such a high-volume business, he is able to make a profit or come damn near to a profit on 5% to 7%, whereas the independent bookstore must struggle, could not get a profit anywhere near that low margin. The other types of sales of books, turning away, if we could, from the adult trade area for a minute, are direct mail books. These are very popular. As we mentioned, they're heavily used by Time Life and Reader's Digest, and the marketing has become almost a science. It'll be determined whether there is a market for these books, and if there isn't, the books just are not published and not sold. Door-to-door sales of books are, in the United States, almost exclusively encyclopedias, though some religious books are sold door-to-door, Bibles. In Europe, however, door-to-door sales are much more common. And door-to-door salespeople promote sales of book club books through door-to-door. In other words, a salesman comes to your door and says, I don't have a specific book for you right now, but I want you to join such and such a book club. From now on, it'll be mailed to you. And that's a unique way to sell book clubs. Instead of being sold book clubs via advertisements, join now, get 3 books free, it's a case of a person coming to the door and say, join now, I'm a door-to-door salesman. Well, hi, how are you? But this isn't Europe. You know, it's hard to make that type of transition here in the United States. Some European publishers have come to the United States and tried to do it, but without much success. The last type of sales of books from U.S. publishers is export sales. And there really isn't that much of it. At most, export sales are anywhere from 5 to 10% of total sales. Export sales for 1982 will probably be around $700 million. It's not much, but it is something, and some of the technical scientific professional books are very, very popular overseas. We sell in the range of, say, 20 to 30% of all technical scientific professional books abroad. So for them, it is a big market. Our markets are mostly, I see, cut. Yes, sir. Why don't we take a break at this point and come on back in, say, 10 minutes, and we'll discuss a little bit more. Thank you. I think we're about ready to go here. I was discussing exports of books, mentioning that we do sell about 5 to 10% of total sales of U.S. publishing overseas, mostly to Canada, to the United Kingdom, Australia, and Japan. Those 4 countries account for about 75% of our sales, and there are an additional 100 or 150 countries that buy U.S. books in small amounts. One last, yes, please.
Question in reference to the books that are remainders.
Mm-hmm.
The sales work with those. Do those sales get negotiated through the printers or the publishers? And how does that proceed?
Yeah. There are in New York City actual remainder houses And I'm sorry, I've lost track of what this would mean. A half circle?
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question. Repeat the question.
A question so far as...
Me repeat the question. The question is, how are remaindered books developed? What is the process by which books get remaindered, and what happens to them? Is that a fair approximation?
Yeah.
How can you say no, right? Remaindered books are of two forms. One type of remaindered book would be a bestseller that has just simply run out of time. It's a hardcover book. It's been on the bestseller list for about 6 months or a year, and now it is falling rapidly. The rights have been sold to the paperback book company, and it's about to appear in mass market paperback format. What happens to this hardcover book? There are two alternatives. You can either scrap it, turn it back into pulp for the next book, or you could sell it to a remainder dealer in New York. And a remainder dealer will buy that book from you. Let's take the list price of the book is $10. The remainder dealer will give you about $1.50, and it is his hope that he will be able to sell enormous quantities of that book to bookstores at a price of about $2. So he'll try and get a 25% markup on that book. Buys it for $1.50 from the book publisher, tries to sell it to bookstores for $2, and the bookstores are going to try and sell it to you for $2.95. And that's how remaindered books generally meet their ultimate end, either as pulped or as heavily discounted sales, a sale of 70% off, if you will, the regular price. There is a second type of remaindered book. It's a book that it never should have been published in the first place, but now it's a remainder. What is this book? This book is a book that usually contains a lot of photographs or drawings. It was printed either in the United States or overseas. It claims to have had a sale price of $24.95, and it is now available special to you at only $6.95. Should that book ever have been published? No. Should it have been sold at $24.95? No way. No one's going to buy it at $24.95. But I'm browsing in Crown Books, so I buy it for $6.95. The price of that book, Crown bought it for probably $3 or $4. They're going to make a 30% or 40% markup on that. The publishing firm who did that book sold it to bookstores at about $2 or $3 or so. So everybody profits on a book that supposedly had a list price of $24.95. No way. You know, but that's kind of a remaindered book. They're claiming it's a remaindered book. They're claiming we tried to sell it at $24.95, but lack of response forces us, against our best wishes, to sell it to you at $7. So life is tough. So, that's the way the textile market works. Special for you, you know. The book business has the same kind of attitude. Special for you, this line of books that could have been remaindered. Probably they're designed anyway for a $6 or $7 market. Fair enough? Did that answer your question in any way? I hope so. Thank you. Let's talk for a minute about this last aspect of the publishing process, and that's subsidiary rights. You know, I've got it listed chronologically as the last item there, but for many book publishing firms, this is the most important aspect of their operation. It is here that if they're going to really make some profits in the book, this is the place to do it. Every year, the last week in September, publishers throughout the United States get on airplanes and fly to West Germany, to Frankfurt, and they spend a year in Frankfurt at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And they bring along a listing and sometimes one or two copies of all of their books. And the idea is to sell your book to other publishers from foreign countries visiting the fair. And you'll sell it in several ways. One is you could sell the translation rights. That is, your book is put out in the English language, and you want to sell it to the French firm of Hachette, and Hachette will translate it into French and sell it in France. Other ways you may sell those rights is you tried to market the book in the English language overseas without any success, so you're going to sell it to a British firm that probably is much more business acumen as to where this book will fit in with different countries than you are, so you'll sell the rights to them to have them market the book. Frankfurt is a big trading grounds for sales of rights and foreign translations. There are other ways, however, to get money out of your subsidiary rights. One of them is something that we see this week in the Washington Post, again having to do with ex-President Carter. His company, if you will, the publishing firm of Bantam, has sold the syndication rights of that book to the Washington Post. The Post pays Bantam such and such as an amount of money to serialize the book in a week in the Washington Post. That's part of the syndication. That is the syndication process, and that's part of the subsidiary rights sales. Finally, if you're extra lucky as a publisher, you may be able to sell the rights of your books to a film studio or possibly to TV, in which case you'd be able to get additional money if they make a film of it. In any case, you get a certain amount of money from them, even if they make a film and it does no good, or even if they make a pilot. There are a certain amount of funds that you could get out of it. So that is, in a nutshell, subsidiary rights. And fortunately, I understand that this nutshell is going to be heavily expanded on later in your series here, when they will get into the details of subsidiary rights. Finally, let's look at the last section of the outline, which is associations and issues. I think we can very briefly go through this associations. The purpose of this is just to familiarize you with what are the major organizations out there who are concerned with the book industry. And I've listed them in no special order. The first one, Associations of American Publishers, represents about 300 U.S. book publishers. These 300 book publishers are all the largest publishers in the United States, and they represent about 85% of U.S. sales of books. They have offices in New York City and in Washington, D.C., and you may later in the series be hearing people from the AAP coming in and addressing you on different activities of the association or of the book industry. Obviously, the rationale for the AAP's existence is to support and promote the interests of the U.S. book publishers who are their members. The issues that you see listed below the associations here are all of concern to the AAP, and I'll get into that in a little bit. The next association is the Association of American University Presses. There are about 90 members. Most of the university presses are with the association. The association is located in New York City, and again, most of the positions it takes on issues and its interests are the same as the AAP. They coincide in many respects. We'll get into those issues also. The American Booksellers Association represents U.S. bookstores. They're located in New York City. They have over 1,000 members, and they are an organization in some kind of trouble. The AAP, the ABA, the American Booksellers Association, because of changes in the book industry, because when the ABA was founded, there were mostly independent stores, what we call mom and pop stores. Well, now the association also has as its members Dalton, Walden, Crown, Barnes & Nobles, Book Annex, many firms with branches. And there has become a diversity within the organization of the chains on the one side fighting the independents on the other. the issues center on what is the price the chains pay for books and what's the price the independents pay for books. The independents claim that they're in a bad position because the most discount they could get is, say, 40 to 46%, whereas the chains, perhaps they can get as much as 50 to 55%. So there is a lot of problems within the ABA that they have yet to settle or iron out. And it's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen here. It's easy to say that eventually they'll develop into two separate organizations. One association representing the independent stores and the other representing the chains. Maybe it will happen. The book publishers are not really on the sidelines on this issue. They have tried to accommodate both of these bookstores by saying, look, we will give you larger discounts if you promise you won't return any books. You'll remember, I hope I said to you that a bookstore buys books from a publisher kind of on consignment. Let's say it buys 10 books, 10 books of one title. Any books that it doesn't sell within, say, a 3-month period, it can send those books back to the publisher and get full credit. It's a nifty deal, but there are costs of doing that. There are inventory costs, there are postal costs the bookseller must pay, there are the costs that the clerical costs of handling all of this, which could be extensive. So some bookstores say, look, I'm a smart cookie. I know my audience. I know who comes in and out of my store. If you will give me not 40%, but say 50, 55%, and no return privilege, I will take you up on that. And some bookstores have done it. Others say, oh, you're crazy, you know. I don't care how well I know my audience. Books are sold on a one-by-one basis. Each book finds its own market. How do I know? If that woman likes the book today, how will I know she'll like another one of the same topic tomorrow? So I'd rather take my chances with a flat 40%. So there's a kind of way in which the publishers are trying to say to each of the areas, the chains and the independent, if you want more discounts, we'll give you more discounts, but you got to accept the no return part of it. And the no return part of it means that if you don't sell the book, bang, it's quick onto the remainder table. It's the job of the bookstore owner to determine when that book has ended its useful life and get it out there and get some money for it anyway. So that's the American Booksellers Association. The next two organizations, the Book Manufacturers Institute, is very simply an organization representing book printing firms, printing and binding firms. We've got about 30 members. American Paper Institute has 80 members. What they are is firms that manufacture and sell paper to the book industry. Both organizations, the BMI and the API, generally support the interests of the publishers, but not always. As we've learned here in this building, the BMI and the AAP were very strong adversaries over a battle of copyright involving domestic manufacturing requirements of the law. I'm not sure how many of you realize it, but if you're a U.S. author, if you're a U.S. citizen, then your book has to be printed and bound in the United States. You can't go to England and have it printed and bound and then brought back in this country for sale. It's part of copyright. If you're going to get copyright protection for your book, you got to have it printed and bound by a genuine, honest-to-golly U.S. printer and binder.
That's you overstate. That's not quite the way it goes. I don't particularly want to go into it at length here, but it would be nice if you not make that flat statement in public, because it really does exceed what happens.
We'll talk about it later.
Right.
Okay, good. The final area I wanted to bring out was the Book Industry Study Group. The Book Industry Study Group tries to get together the different organizations, the ABA, the American University Presses, the book publishers, the BMI, and the American Paper Institute, and conduct studies and research on the book publishing area. The purpose is to find out how many readers there are in the United States, who buys books, who reads books, where can we do some intensive research to find out and improve distribution of books in the U.S. So the study group was set up about 5 or 10 years ago to do research on the industry. Yes?
I'm curious about that. You were stating that they have this growth every year and so forth.
Mhm.
And yet, I don't know whether it came from these people or not, but I keep reading these things recently about what a teeny tiny percentage of the public buys books, and what even less percentage actually reads books very often and so forth. It sounds like there's a contradiction there.
There are contradictions. The Book Industry Study Group, I'm sorry, I think you're signaling again, aren't you, to repeat the question, are you not? The question is, there are contradictions in the information that comes out on readership and purchases of books in the United States, correct? And what are the real facts behind this? The real facts are we don't know. The real facts are that the Book Industry Study Group hired, I think it was Skelly and some other, Yankelovich, Skelly, White, to do a study of book reading in the United States. And they came up with some findings that were not plausible. They came up with findings that 1 out of every 3 person buys a hardcover book every couple of weeks or so. And bookstore people say that that just cannot be. And I've got the financial receipts to prove it. So the results of that study are subject to a lot of faults. The Gallup organization in Princeton has also done studies on book readership, and I think they contradict what has taken place regarding this Yankelovich study. So, as I say, there are conflicting thoughts about what happens, who buys books and who reads them. Probably the best studies are those that are done by Walden and Dalton and not available to the general public. Lord knows they must know what is happening to traffic in their stores. They probably have an excellent indication of what type of person buys what type of book, but they do not necessarily wish to release this to their rivals in the business. I suspect that may be part of it. But there's so many contradictions out there, it's hard to know what statements to make about readership in the United States. We do know that book prices have gone up, sales of books have gone up, as I say, about 10% a year, and unit sales far less than that. Far, far less than that. If we could, let's get into the last part of this morning's session, and that is the issues sector of publishing. I'd like, if I could, to save the very first statement of the issue here, the blockbuster mentality, to the last. Reverse the order somewhat on this. I'd like to begin by talking about copyright and fair use. I think it's no secret to you people that there has been and will continue to be a big problem between the publishers and the authors on one side and schools and libraries on the other. And the issue is over what do we do with the Xerox machine? When we Xerox books or journal articles in particular or magazine articles, must we pay a royalty to the copyright owners? This is subject to great debate in the halls here of the Madison building, and I don't think that we're about to resolve it or approach it too closely right now. Let it become an issue that can be dealt with in other sessions. But let me make you aware that the U.S. publishing industry and the Authors League, representing authors and writers, very, very sensitive to this issue, very sensitive, and they feel that the fair use document will finally wind up in the courts for ultimate resolution of this matter. Censorship. Censorship is somewhat of a cyclical activity, C-Y-C-L-I-C-A-L. Cyclical in the sense that it raises its head over different periods of time. It can never be put down. The publishers feel that the First Amendment is the issue in censorship. There should be freedom of expression, even for materials that are not of good taste. And censorship now in the 80s seems to be growing again. There are groups organized to examine books in libraries and, of course, books in the schoolroom to make sure that what they feel the national mores should be. Publishers feel that national mores should be tied to the First Amendment and that that should be the overriding issue in all of these matters. Censorship, always a problem in the publishing industry. Industry concentration and conglomerates. You may well have read that there is a, if you will, a New York-LA connection. That is, more and more publishing firms are linking up with film companies, linking up with television companies, linking up with large conglomerates who may or may not have the best issues of either the reading public at heart or certainly the publishers at heart. The fact of the matter is that there are more publishing companies today than ever before. There are more bookstores today than ever before. There are more book clubs, mail order organizations than ever before, and that there doesn't seem to be much concentration in the industry. There are certain parts of the publishing industry where there aren't that many firms. Law book publishing. One of the first things a lawyer does when he leaves law school is to sue law book publishers because of the high prices of their books. They find out that there aren't many publishers there and they're charging what the lawyers feel to be an awful lot of money for these books. So there, in that particular area, perhaps there is some industry concentration, but by and large there is not. Industry concentration is an issue generally raised by authors when they find they can't get a publisher to do their book. They bang on many doors and find the doors closed to them. They raise the issue of industry concentration. I don't think it's a real issue. I don't believe, and the data certainly don't show, that there is concentration in the publishing industry. Two related issues, library and educational funding, postal rates. Both of these are, if you will, lifelong issues to the publishing industry. The position of publishers, of course, is that library and educational funds should always be higher and postal rates should always be lower. The publishing industry must remember that in terms of library and educational funds, the Great Society is gone. It may return, but not tomorrow. And what has to be done is just focus on what is going on today. It was shocking when I first began to look at the publishing industry years ago to read that the funds going to, say, schools, only about 2% of total funds going to schools go into books and educational materials. I remember back during the Great Society years that publishers used to wear buttons saying 5%, boosted up to 5%. It came close during those times, but it quickly fell back to its present level of about 2%. Very low, depending on whether you're a publisher banging on the schoolhouse door with textbooks, but high if you're the principal of a school and you've got teachers banging on your doors with a union for more wages. And as far as the post office goes, as you know, the post office is now on a pay-as-you-go basis. Publishers in the book field have heavily subsidized rates, even though to us they seem very high. To those who are selling, mailing books, I think it's something like 50 or 60 cents a pound. Before we had our commercial post office, it was in the range of, say, 20 cents a pound. So the subsidy has been reduced, but there still is a heavy subsidy there for mailing books. The issue of technology. Publishers are, as I mentioned earlier, very concerned about electronics. Their question is, what's going to happen with the growth of cable TV, personal computers? Will this affect readership? Will this affect sales of books? A lot of publishers have been told by Apple II, Tandy, and other computer houses that we need you. We make hardware. We don't make software. Why don't you, the book publisher, produce software for us? We need software on zoology, biology, chemistry, whatever, American history. We need all of these programs to go into our computers, which we're selling like crazy. The publishers are saying, yes, yes, let's do it. The editors are saying, no, I can't do it. The editors in most publishing houses feel that their skills and their abilities were developed regarding print on paper. And print on paper that has been sold through bookstores, schools, textbooks, what have you. And for editors to suddenly learn the new ways of developing computer programs is quite an undertaking. So there is some fearfulness on the part of editors in many publishing houses. What will probably happen here is editors or groups will be brought in by publishing firms. They'll buy other firms to come in and actual develop software for Tandy, Apple, and other computer firms. Now, I've saved this one issue for last, and that is the blockbuster mentality. You may be aware of it. I'd like to go over it because it is a honest-to-God issue that should be raised with other spokespeople coming before you. The blockbuster mentality centers on a series of articles done by Thomas Whiteside in the New Yorker magazine a year or two ago. Basically, his thesis is that literature in the United States is going to hell in a handbasket because book publishers are only going to buy manuscripts that sell. They're not going to take a chance on unknown authors. They're not going to spend any money unwisely that they don't see a massive return on. Coincident with this is two things. One, the chain stores, the Daltons, the Waldens, they don't want to take a book and put on their shelves that isn't going to sell. They want blockbusters. They want Thomas Fleming. They want Mishner. They want Barbara Tuchman. Everybody wants Barbara Tuchman. Hey, what can I do? You know, there's only a handful of, if you will, these blockbuster people out there. Authors with a name recognition that regardless of what kind of a title they put on the book or what the topic is, bang, it's going to go. Not only do you have the thoughts that a lot of publishers, the major publishers, the old line publishers, are focusing on blockbusters, assisted by the chain bookstores, but they're also assisted by, in some cases, the media conglomerates, the Warner Brothers, who sees, number one, Warner Brothers owns a paperback, mass-market paperback book company, Warner Books. We'll bring it out there. We'll put it in there. We'll develop a TV series around it. We'll, maybe if we're lucky, we'll get a movie out of this thing. Syndication rights should be Sacco. You know, we're going to get great things out of this. So what Whiteside was getting at in the New Yorker series was that, is this good for the United States? Is this good for the literary world that is our country? And I think that Whiteside's thesis that there is a blockbuster mentality in some houses breaks down when you look at the individual parts. We have in the United States large publishing companies who, of course, they want blockbuster books, but at the same time, they publish a wide range of books. Let's take Random House. Random House has a subsection, Alfred Knopf, famous publisher. Knopf publishes 150 books every year, 150 different titles every year. Knopf is after literature. He is not after blockbusters. If he happens to get a few famous authors, certainly he will nurture them and do everything he can with advertising to make them the blockbuster. But by and large, on 150 titles a year, you can't exclude certain authors. You can't, and you can't focus entirely on a few authors. So I think what I'm getting at is I think that while there is some rationale for a blockbuster mentality in book publishing, I don't think it holds up because you've got a lot of publishers out there, you've only got a few blockbusters, and finally, you've got a lot of outlets beyond Dalton and Walden. There are a lot of independents, and there's a lot of other ways to get your book before the public. This is not to say that every author in search of a publisher is going to find one, but it is to say that in terms of focusing exclusively on the name recognition authors, publishers don't do it. They like to do it, but the vagaries of the business are such that they can't do it. With that, I would like to, if I could, close these remarks. At the same time, if you have some questions, please speak up. We mentioned an area that I covered only briefly, the manufacturing requirements of the copyright law. If there are oversimplifications here, I certainly stand corrected. Anything else one would like to bring up or talk about here? It's an open forum.
Phil, could you briefly talk about the Washington Book Publishers Association?
Sure. Publishers, by and large, are... Yeah, sure. Jane has asked if I would talk about a organization called the Washington Book Publishers Group. Publishers are not alcoholic. Sometimes they only seem that way. The Washington Book Publishers started as a sort of a drinking club in the apartment of one of the people who's going to come talk to you later on. You may remind him of this before he begins to talk. His name is Bill Begell. He's the publisher of Hemisphere, owner and president of Hemisphere Press. And when he came to Washington about 10 years ago, he found that there was no real group in Washington of Washington publishers that could get together and talk about what's going on in the industry and what have you, share a few drinks. So Begell started it, and he phoned different people who were either publishers or very interested or active in the book publishing business, and he formed his own organization. When he went back to New York City, the organization continued, and it has expanded into a formal group that has monthly meetings. I am the, if you will, secretary of the organization this year. That means executive director, president, or whatever you want to call it. Basically, I'm the one who makes sure drinks are served. We meet about once every 4 or 5 weeks at different locations. We try to always get a place that we don't have to pay for, something for free. The American Chemical Society has been very, very nice in doing that. Smithsonian has been nice. Center for the Book has been nice. So we meet at different places. What we do is each of the meetings is to discuss a different aspect of book publishing. Sometimes it's the editing process, and other times it's the design process. We've met at the Washington Post and had a good meeting on the future of the media, what's happening in all the different media. That's basically what the Washington Book Publishers is and what they do. Got about 200 members, many editors, publishers, people with different different aspects of book publishing. Yes, did I see another? Please, sir.
How does the syndication of a book like President Carter's book cut into the sale of the book itself? How is that accounted?
That's a good question. It's kind of a trade-off, isn't it? Question is, again, I've got the half moon. How does syndication work, and what happens with a book that is released in syndicated format, and what are the possible ramifications of this syndication on the eventual sale of the book? Well, number one, the syndication, say of President Carter, is offered to every newspaper throughout the United States. Only those newspapers pick it up where it's going to be of interest. Now, Carter is of interest in Atlanta, Georgia, and Washington, D.C., and probably not in, say, Santa Monica, or who knows, he might be. But it's picked up where the newspaper feels there will be an interest in doing it. As far as cutting into sales, I don't think it's going to happen. I think what happens is, as I understand what is happening with President Carter's book, not every word in the book will appear in the syndicated format. It will just be, not snippets, but the full value will not be given, if you will. And besides, those who are really interested in President Carter and who are even thinking about going out and buying the book, they'll probably inclined to go ahead and buy it anyway, because they want to keep it and refer to it in later years. So generally, syndication, though there is a possibility of losing some people, I think tests have probably shown that you're not going to lose more than 10 to 20% of your sales. And if you can hold it to that, the revenues gained from syndication outweigh this 10 to 20% loss. Besides, by syndicating it, you're in effect advertising it. And you're getting, not free advertising, but you're encouraging others to do it. And what if a guy picks up Saturday's Post, he's got, chapter 8 of the Carter book, and he can't go back and get chapters 1 through 7? Buy the book, So there you go. Yeah.
Can you speak for a moment about vanity presses? and
Sure.
their share of the marketplace and stuff?
Yeah, right. Vanity presses, the question is, what about vanity press publishing in the United States and share of the market? The vanity presses probably have a share of the market no higher than 5%, if that. Very, very low share. Vanity presses, as probably most of you know, are not really publishing houses. What they are is printing presses, print shops disguised as publishing houses. Many of the best ones come right out and tell you that. There's a press in Chicago called the Adams Press, which says, print your book, send a couple bucks, get a brochure which will tell you all about how we do it and the prices we charge for different qualities. They are what we call an upfront vanity press. They offer you nothing more than good prices for printing of your book. Once it's printed, it's yours. Those vanity presses that say, you pay us the money, we will print your book, we will advertise your book, we will market your book, are generally going to take you for a ride of unpleasant financial dimensions and no return to you outside of the fact that your vanity has been assuaged by having your book printed. Yes?
The publisher pays, say, $1 million for one blockbuster.
Right.
It does so at the expense of paying, say, $50,000 each to 20 other writers.
True.
And therefore, affects the wide variety of literary possibilities
No.
that might develop from those 20 other authors. And in keeping with this, isn't another development that the personal relationship that often exists between an editor and these smaller writers who are being cultivated in the 30s has disappeared now?
I don't think so. You have to ask editors on that, and praise the Lord, you'll have one at the next session who can address that. Editors at blockbuster houses that take in blockbusters, are not going to last there very long if they find out that they've got nothing to edit, or they're being excluded. They'd like to do other books. They will leave those houses and, as they have done, set up new publishing houses and publish those books. I mentioned Alfred Knopf as a publisher of many books each year, 150 books, 150 titles a year, and yet, even though his books are all, if you will, literary-minded, because he's a member of Random House, he uses Random House to distribute his books. So Knopf has an entree to all the bookstores in the United States. He's not being shut out, and other publishers have the same the same approach. A book will find its own market, although there are obviously blockbusters out there and publishers like to have it. You're risking something, aren't you? If you take your $1 million and you spend it all on one publisher, when you could have developed a stable of 5, 10, 15, 20 other authors, what is the likelihood of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of those authors developing into a blockbuster? So that's the trade-off. And if you get burned on your blockbuster mentality, if it doesn't work out the way you want it to be, you're going to be in trouble. You can't have a blockbuster every time, not unless you chain Mishner to the publishing desk, you know. How are you going to do this? They shop around too. And each time you come out with a blockbuster, it gets that much harder to get that person the next time for a blockbuster. Anything else? Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead.
I just had one question.
Mhm.
Is there any average cost or any, well, I think what I want to know is, how much does it cost to publish a book, one of two ways? That one is picked up by the literary agent and John Doe Public, who can't get picked up.
Mhm.
Give me an idea of what the cost.
What would the cost be of literary agents accepting your book, your manuscript? The cost to you would be nothing. If you are an author and you send a book to a literary agent, the agent supposedly will, if he likes your book, he will contact you, say, I love it. I think I know a place where we can sell it, we can place it. At that point, only when the agent is able to place the book with the publishing house will the agent talk to you about what percent is in it for the agent. I really don't know what percent is in for the agent. I would say it's got to be at least 10%. It may be more than that. 10. There you go. Thank you, people. You've been just terrific. I hope you're all on videotape here today.
Thank you.
Thanks again.